Hi hand readers, welcome to number 13 in my presentation of mini tutorials about thumbs. And today we're going to be talking about the shape of the tip of the thumb. I'm Jennifer, I'm based in Johannesburg. I've been reading hands and teaching about hand reading for 30 years. If you haven't been to my channel before, welcome. The tip of the thumbs have great value in assessing people's character. And the shape of the tip does give some information to the reader about how the person finally expresses themselves. And this is where the 5-element system of how to read hands really comes into play as an easy way and a very accurate way to remember these variables of tip shapes. In the 5-element system, we define 4 different tip shapes, and of course each will correspond to an element. And we know that in nature, earth, water, fire, and air respectively exhibit certain principles and characteristics. These are scientific. And we transpose these characteristics onto the human person, and based on the type of shape of tip, we'll be able to understand them more deeply and more profoundly. And it is quite profound because it really does, the thumb being the ruler of the hand, as I always say, the thumb tip will really give a strong sense of a person's character, strength of character, how they express themselves, and what their orientations are, what their needs are, what their preferences are. So we mustn't underestimate the significance of the shape of the tip of thumbs. Each tip shape is governed by an element, as mentioned, and they are defined as being square, pointed, spatulate, or rounded. Just before I jump into the 4 tip shapes and their various meanings or interpretations, there's another little tip, excuse the pun, on how to assess the tip of a person's thumb, and that is you press into the cushioning. And if it bounces back quickly, the person has more resilience. If it takes a long time for the flesh to repad, it's obvious that the person has a lowered energy level. A square-shaped tip, like in this image here, would relate to practicality, to honesty, to common sense, to reliability. These are all earth characteristics and traits. And in fact, in the 5-element system, there's virtually a dictionary for any earth-governed marker in the hands. So these would also include things like level-headedness. Person would be law-abiding, they'd be organized, they'd be very administrative. This is one of the strongest signs of an administrative capacity in the person. When I say this, I'm talking about square-shaped tips, and incidentally, not just thumb tips, but also fingertips. That's another conversation because each finger might exhibit a different shaped tip. But a squarish thumb tip could definitely indicate an administratively, let's say, talented person, or a person who takes care of their admin. Of course, in hand reading, we never take one marking in isolation. And a person with square-shaped thumb tips might, in the unredeemed, for example, have, say, limited imagination. They might not be the most creative people. But that is always going to be relative to the rest of the hand and what it exhibits. They might have a very practical type of creativity, if we're thinking creative. And unless the tip is supple, we might find that the person is resistant to change. So these are earth characteristics. Earth, as we know, it's a solid energy. It's a fixed energy. It doesn't take easy to being. It doesn't move unless it's moved. So it's the only element that doesn't move unless it's moved. And it might be difficult for people with thumbs that have earth-shaped tips to handle change. They would be risk-averse, and they wouldn't be happy with any sudden upheaval. As you see also in the illustrations, each element has a symbol that's associated with it. You might have noticed the square on the earth tip, and now we come to water, which is represented by a circle. And water-shaped tips narrow at their end. They're more tapered, they're more pointed. This is a sign of a person who is intuitive. That's one of the strongest signs in hands of intuition. Pointed tips are like antennae. It's as if there's a feeler out in the person's psyche for information and for vibration. And this is also a sign of lots of a strong imagination, very creative ideas. Follow through might be limited, but certainly the ideas are there for people with pointed thumb tips. And there might be a bit of touchiness. Another strong water characteristics that apply to people with pointed thumb tips is idealism. These people are dreamy. They are really perhaps a little not of this world. Perhaps even escapist. I have seen several addicts with this feature. Actually, pointed thumb tips are not that common, but I've seen it definitely on a heroin addict, comes to mind. And of course, if the thumb tip is also bendy, it adds water to water. There's water added to water in terms of the element system. The bend is governed by water, and the tip shape is governed by water. This excess of water might show a person who's very easily manipulated. They might be easily flattered and seduced even, and they might be very manipulative or have the capacity in them to manipulate. Now we come to the fire-shaped tip, represented by a triangle in the 5-element system, and it's spatulate. In other words, it widens at the top of the phalange. So there's this widening effect. It's as if it becomes more spacious as the phalange ends. And of course, being fire governed, we've got here a restless energy, a forceful energy. There's energy, we could say there's enterprise in the person. This is a sign often of a craftsman who's good with their hands and innovative and creative in the way that they express. So quite helpful to have fire-shaped tips if you are going to be working with your hands, thumb tips that is, and creative and original in their approach to their art and their craft. But the problem is here that being fire-governed, they could become very obsessive, and they might be, in a sense, rather dispersive in the way they go about their business. In other words, unfocused. This is a person who's expressive, they're versatile, they're probably quite active in their world. Maybe they like being out in the bush, quite adventurous people. They are maybe even impulsive. And if the tip is particularly large, impulsiveness would definitely be the case, especially if it's also bulbous. That would add to impulsivity and spontaneity in the person. And the fourth possible tip shape is governed by air. It's represented by a cup symbol, and it's the most common shape for the thumb. Actually, most of us do have pretty much this conic. In the old palmistry, it's called conic shape. And the characteristics here are open-mindedness, warm-heartedness, creative personality, easygoing, communicative, friendly, spontaneous, responsive. And next week I'll be talking about dermatoglyphics. At last, I've been wanting to talk about dermatoglyphics for so long. I should be talking about dermatoglyphics because after all, it is my branding, God-given glyphs, which is the short form of the word dermatoglyphic, which I sort of coined when I was writing one of my earlier books called God-Given Glyphs. That I just thought I'd mention here is that relative to the shape of the tip of the thumb is this question of whether or not a person has a clubbed thumb. And if you go right back in my videos to thumbs number 1, you'll find information about clubbed thumbs. Of course, clubbed thumbs have their own specific tip shape, which is very bulbous indeed. See you next week. Thanks so much for listening and watching. Please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Bye.